My name is Elena Marlowe, and I'm 31 years old. I'm not a doctor like my parents, nor a rising star in medicine like my older brother. I'm simply a woman who spent years saving every penny, sacrificing friendships, and pouring every ounce of herself into a dream to build a company of her own. That dream was supposed to shine on the night of my grand opening. The office I had worked so hard to create was glowing with string lights, the tables dressed in fresh flowers, and our software, my life's work, ready to be unveiled to the world. Guests arrived slowly, local shop owners, investors, a few neighbors who had heard about us. They shook my hand, offered congratulations, and spoke with excitement about what was to come. But as I looked across the room, my heart grew heavier. The chairs I had carefully set aside for my family, my father, my mother, my brother, remained empty. I had written them each a personal invitation, with handwritten notes telling them how much this night meant to me. And yet, as the room filled with strangers, the faces I longed for never came. I told myself they were delayed. I kept watching the door, hoping, praying. But the truth arrived not in footsteps but in a vibration against my palm. My phone buzzed with a message. I opened it quickly, expecting reassurance. It was from my mother. Not a word of pride, not a whisper of apology, just this. "We need to talk about profits. Your brother says he deserves a cut." The words sliced through me. They hadn't shown up to stand with me. Instead, they were already discussing how to divide something they had never helped me build. The music, the chatter, the laughter around me, all of it blurred into a hollow silence. And maybe you've known a silence like that, the kind that doesn't come from an empty room, but from the absence of the people who should have been there the most. Maybe you've worked for something, dreamed for something, only to realize the ones you counted on had other priorities, or worse, saw your success as theirs to claim. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, please stay with me. And if this story touches something inside you, I invite you to like and subscribe. Not for me, but for everyone who's ever carried the same hurt. Because stories like mine are not rare. They live quietly in the hearts of many. That night, as I stood among balloons and banners, one truth sank deep into me. The sharpest betrayals don't come from enemies. They come from those you once trusted to never let you down. To understand why that message from my mother cut so deeply, you'd have to know where I came from. I grew up in a house where medicine was more than a career. It was the family crown. My parents, both well-respected doctors, built their lives around white coats, diplomas, and reputation. In the halls of our large suburban home, framed certificates lined the walls like sacred icons, each one a silent reminder of what was expected of us. My brother Jackson, 3 years older, wore that crown with ease. He was the golden child from the start. At 16, he was already shadowing our father in the hospital. At 18, he published a paper with our mother, an achievement so grand that my parents threw a party with a cake shaped like Harvard Medical School, where he was soon accepted. That night, the house glowed with pride. Neighbors gathered, and my parents toasted his brilliance with sparkling champagne. On me? I stood in the corner, clapping politely, wondering if anyone noticed I was there. I was different. While Jackson dissected frogs in the garage, I was in my room building websites, sketching ideas, fascinated by the possibilities of technology. At 13, I proudly showed my parents my first coding project, a little site I had built for my classmates. They smiled, nodded, and then asked if I was ready to start focusing on biology instead. That was the rhythm of my childhood. Every step I took into my own passions was met with polite dismissal, then quickly overshadowed by Jackson's latest triumph. I still remember the day I won a regional competition for young entrepreneurs in high school. I came home clutching the certificate, my heart racing. My parents congratulated me, and within minutes turned the conversation back to Jackson's internship at Johns Hopkins. It was as if my victories existed only in the shadows of his. Over dinners, the talk was always medicine, his research, his residency, his promising career. I learned to sit quietly, to nod at the right times, to swallow down the ache of invisibility. In that home, success had only one shape, a stethoscope around your neck. Anything else was tolerated, but never celebrated. By the time I entered college, I carried two truths inside me: that I loved technology and that my family would never understand. I studied business at the University of Washington, sneaking computer science classes into my schedule. My parents paid the tuition, but not without constant reminders. This is just a phase, Elena. You'll come to your senses and apply to med school, but I never came to my senses, their senses. Instead, I worked part-time tech jobs, gaining experience while Jackson moved from one prestigious hospital to another. Each holiday dinner became a ritual, Jackson announcing his new title or award and my parents beaming like the sun. I would share something about my projects, my small steps forward, only to be met with a polite smile, then silence. That silence was the heaviest weight of all. It wasn't open rejection. It wasn't cruel words. It was worse. It was being invisible. Looking back, I think part of me still hoped that one day they would see me, not just tolerate me, that one day they might clap for me as loudly as they clapped for him. But each year, that hope grew smaller, buried under years of comparisons and dismissals. So when I stood in that office at 31, looking at those empty chairs, their absence wasn't just about one night. It was the echo of an entire lifetime of being overlooked. And that message about profits wasn't just about money. It was proof of something I had always feared, that in their eyes, I was never a daughter chasing a dream. I was simply a resource, useful only if it benefited the family. That's why it cut so deep. Because behind that text were decades of silence, decades of watching my brother celebrated while I faded into the background. And in that moment, I knew I could never go back to being invisible again. By the time I graduated college, I already knew my future would never look like the one my parents had drawn for me. Medicine was their dream, not mine. I wanted to build something with my own hands, even if it meant walking a road no one else in my family respected. So I took a corporate tech job, not because I loved it, but because it gave me a paycheck. A steady income meant I could save, and saving meant I could someday break free. While my coworkers spent weekends at happy hours or on trips abroad, I stayed behind. I rented a tiny studio apartment, the kind where you could touch the stove from your bed if you stretched your arm far enough. My meals were plain: ramen noodles, peanut butter sandwiches. I canceled streaming services, avoided shopping, skipped vacations. Every dollar I saved wasn't just money. It was proof to myself that one day I would have enough courage to walk away. At night, while others laughed in crowded bars, I sat in front of my laptop teaching myself how to code better, how to design, how to pitch. My desk was littered with scribbled notes, prototypes, and coffee cups gone cold. Sometimes I fell asleep still sitting in the chair, only to wake with a stiff neck and start again. There were moments of doubt, many of them. I remember once staring at my bank statement, realizing that all I had was $97,000 saved after 4 years of sacrifice. It felt both like everything and nothing. My parents, of course, thought I was wasting my life. At Christmas dinners, they asked when I would settle down with a real career. Jackson, sipping wine and boasting about his new practice, would smirk and say, "You'll thank us when you finally come around." But I didn't come around. At 26, I quit my job. Just like that. One resignation letter, one final walk out of the building with my box of belongings. I turned my tiny apartment into my first office. The living room became my workspace, the kitchen table my conference area, and the corner near the window my so-called CEO desk. I couldn't afford much, but it was mine. The early months were brutal. There were nights when I stared at lines of code that refused to work, whispering to myself, maybe Dad was right. Maybe this world will eat me alive. But then I'd take a deep breath, open another tutorial, and keep going. I called the software SmartScale, a system for small businesses designed to be simple, intuitive, and affordable. I wanted to help the very people who rarely got attention: the shop owner, the baker, the bookstore clerk. I knew their struggles. I'd watched my neighborhood businesses drown in endless paperwork while giant corporations had tools they could never afford. SmartScale would change that. Still, I was only one person, And I was running out of time. My savings would last maybe 18 months if I lived carefully. I knew I needed help, but who would join a company with no money and no promise? That's when I met Maria Sanchez. She was a developer, sharp and experienced, but tired of the corporate grind. We met at a small tech meetup, and I told her about SmartScale over coffee. She listened quietly, then said something I'll never forget. My mother runs a bakery. She's drowning in receipts and outdated software. If your system could help her, then it's worth building. She didn't ask about salary. She didn't ask about stability. She asked about meaning. And for the first time, I felt like someone truly understood. Maria joined as my lead developer. With her, everything accelerated. Soon after, a young graduate named Zach came on board, brilliant, full of ideas, eager to prove himself. Then came Taylor, a marketing specialist laid off from a big firm who believed in us enough to work part-time. We became a team. We weren't bound by blood, but by belief. In that small office, cluttered with second-hand furniture and fueled by cheap coffee, I felt something I had never felt in my parents' house: belonging. 6 months later, we got our first breakthrough. An angel investor named Richard Weber saw our beta version, tested it in his wife's boutique, and came back with a smile. He offered $50,000 for a small stake. My heart raced as we signed the papers in our tiny office, our logo taped crookedly on the wall. Richard shook my hand and said, "You're solving a real problem. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." That night, I called my parents to share the news. My mother answered, distracted as always. I told her about the investment, the validation, the hope it gave us. She paused, then replied, "That's nice, dear. Did you hear? Jackson was just accepted into the hospital's leadership program. Youngest doctor ever." Her words hung in the air like smoke. My victory meant nothing. Once again, Jackson was the headline, and I was a footnote. I put down the phone and sat in the quiet of my apartment office, the papers still warm from Richard's pen on the desk beside me. For a moment, I felt the old ache of invisibility creeping back. But then I looked around at the painted walls, the makeshift desks, the tired but determined faces of my team, and I realized I was no longer invisible. Not here, not with them. The weeks leading up to our launch were a blur of long nights and nervous anticipation. Maria, Zach, and Taylor practically lived in the office with me. We tested every feature, fixed every bug, and rehearsed every demo. The walls of that little office bore witness to our exhaustion, but also to our hope. For me, this wasn't just a product launch. It was the day I would finally prove, to my parents, to Jackson, maybe even to myself, that I was worthy of being seen. I wanted it to be perfect, so I went beyond the technical details. I handwrote invitations for my family, each one carefully worded, each one carrying photographs of my journey, from scribbled sketches on napkins to the polished screens of SmartScale. I told them how much it would mean to me to have them there. When I called my parents, my mother promised they'd try to come. Jackson didn't answer, so I left a voicemail, reminding him of the date, asking him to stop by, even if just for 30 minutes. I wanted him to see me, if only for a moment. The day arrived bright and clear, as if even the Seattle sky wanted to give me a gift. I woke early, dressed in a simple blue dress that matched our company logo, and pulled my hair into a neat twist. I looked in the mirror and whispered, "This is your day." By 4 o'clock, the office hummed with energy. Business owners chatted excitedly near the demo stations. Investors walked through, nodding with interest. My team, though exhausted, radiated pride. Every few minutes, someone clapped me on the shoulder or pressed my hand, telling me how impressive it all looked. But amid the joy, I couldn't stop glancing at the door. The chairs I had reserved for my family, front row and clear view, remained empty. At first, I told myself they were just late. Then, as the minutes ticked by, I convinced myself they'd arrive just in time for my presentation. At 5:15, I took the small stage we had set up, my heart pounding. I scanned the crowd. 30 people, all strangers or colleagues, all smiling, but none of them shared my last name. I steadied my voice and spoke. What began as a vision to help small businesses has become a reality thanks to the incredible team beside me. The audience applauded warmly. Questions flowed, praise followed. Objectively, it was a success, but inside, I felt a hollow ache. Each clap of their hands was a reminder of the silence from the people who mattered most. When there was a lull, I slipped away for a moment, retreating to the corner of the office. Against my better judgment, I pulled out my phone. My breath caught as I saw the first image on social media. My parents, standing proudly beside Jackson and his wife on the deck of their new lakefront home, champagne glasses raised high, smiles stretched across their faces. The caption read, "So proud of our son and daughter-in-law on their beautiful new home." A true family milestone. In the background, I saw uncles, aunts, cousins, all the very people I had invited. Every single one of them had chosen Jackson's housewarming over my grand opening. Not one had even tried to split their time as they promised. I felt my throat close. My hands trembled so badly I had to set the phone down. For a few moments, I locked myself in the bathroom, splashing cold water on my face, whispering to my reflection, "Don't you dare cry. Not here. Not now." When I stepped back out, I wore the practiced smile I had learned long ago at family dinners, the one that said, "I'm fine, even when I'm not." The event ended with handshakes, new clients, and promises of meetings. By every measure, it was a triumph. But when the last guest left and the room fell silent, I found myself picking up empty glasses, alone once again. That's when my phone buzzed with another message from my mother. For a moment, hope flickered. Maybe it was an apology, maybe she finally realized, but when I opened it, my stomach dropped. "We need to talk about profits. Your brother says he deserves a cut." It wasn't just absence anymore. It wasn't just silence. It was betrayal. A double wound. First, the family that failed to show up. Second, the family that now demanded ownership of what they never built. I sank into a chair, surrounded by remnants of a celebration that had suddenly soured. Tears slid down my cheeks, quiet but unstoppable. 4 years of sacrifice, of loneliness, of living on next to nothing, and for them, it was just another asset to divide. That night, as I drove home, my vision blurred with anger and grief. The words repeated in my mind like a curse. "Your brother says he deserves a cut." And for the first time, I felt something shift inside me, something that had been waiting for years. I knew then that this wasn't just about smart scale. It was about my worth, and I would no longer let them take it from me. 2 nights after the launch, my phone lit up again. This time, it wasn't a text about profits. It was an invitation, if you could call it that. "Family dinner, Sunday at 6. Dad's grilling steaks. We need to discuss your business situation." I nearly threw the phone across the room. No apology, no mention of missing the most important night of my life, just an expectation that I would show up, sit down, and hand over pieces of myself like I always had. But I went. Not to bend, not this time, but to stand. When I pulled into the familiar circular driveway, Jackson's new luxury SUV glistened in the evening light. My mother opened the door with her practiced smile, kissing my cheek as though nothing had happened. "Everyone's out back," she chirped, as if I were just arriving for any other Sunday supper. Walking through those halls lined with Jackson's framed achievements, I felt like a stranger in my own home. On the patio, Dad manned the grill. Jackson lounged with a drink in hand, Lisa beside him glowing with contentment. Not one of them stood to greet me. Finally, Dad looked up. "Here she is?" The businesswoman of the hour, Jackson raised his glass with a smirk. "Hey, sis. How'd your computer thing go? Sorry we couldn't make it. Housewarming was insane." I swallowed hard. "Yes, I saw the pictures." Dinner began, conversation circling endlessly around Jackson's new home, his lakefront views, his renovations. My grand opening didn't exist in their world. Not until the steaks were served. Then my mother finally turned her gaze on me. "So, Elena," she began sweetly, "we wanted to talk about your company." Jackson has some thoughts about how the family could be involved. Jackson leaned forward, adopting the tone he used when explaining procedures to patients. I realized my medical practice management experience could be a huge asset to your software. I could help you expand into healthcare features. In return, of course, I'd need a reasonable equity stake, say 25%. After all, the Marlowe name carries weight. I set my fork down, staring in disbelief. Dad nodded approvingly. Your brother has connections that could open doors. That's worth real value, Elena Mom added, almost proudly. And we could help polish your image. Business attire, presentation skills, you'd appear more professional. For a moment, I couldn't speak. They had given nothing, not a dime of funding, not a word of encouragement, not even their presence at my launch. And now, they wanted a quarter of everything I had built. Finally, I found my voice. Let me make sure I understand. You want 25% of my company, my savings, my years of work, my sacrifice, in exchange for your advice and the family name. The same name none of you wanted associated with my computer hobby until now? Dad waved a hand. Don't be dramatic. We're trying to help you. Family supports family. I laughed, a sharp, hollow sound. Family supports family? Is that what you call skipping my launch to toast Jackson's house? Is that what you call dismissing me for decades, never once asking how I was doing? You don't want to support me. You want to claim me. Jackson rolled his eyes. Here we go with the victim routine. You should be grateful we're offering. I stood, my chair scraping against the stone patio. No. Smart Scale is mine, built with my hands, my nights, my sacrifices. There will be no family equity, no profit sharing, no negotiations. If you wanted to be part of it, you should have stood by me when no one else did. The table fell silent. My parents looked stunned, Jackson offended. But for the first time in my life, I felt tall. I picked up my purse, turned toward the door, and added softly but firmly, when you decide you want a relationship with me that isn't measured in percentages, you know where to find me. Until then, I have nothing more to give. As I walked away, their voices trailed behind me, pleas, protests, excuses, but I didn't turn back. Because in that moment, for the first time, I wasn't just leaving the dinner table. I was leaving behind the chains of invisibility I had carried my whole life. Walking away from that dinner table, I expected regret to follow me home. Instead, I felt lighter, as if I had finally put down a burden I'd been carrying since childhood. For the first time, I had drawn a line no one could cross. The following weeks were filled with long hours and heavy thoughts, but each morning when I stepped into the office, I wasn't alone. Maria greeted me with coffee and encouragement. Zach threw himself into new features, and Taylor sparked ideas that lifted the whole team. They weren't my blood, but they were my family, the kind that showed up, the kind that believed. Together, we grew. Smart Scale signed new clients, attracted investors, and soon filled headlines in local business journals. The world outside my family had begun to notice what I had built, and slowly, I realized their absence no longer haunted me. It had freed me. Months later, Jackson appeared at my office, awkward and hesitant. My parents sent cautious messages trying to bridge the gap, but I didn't crave their approval anymore. Their absence on my grand opening night had been the turning point, the moment I understood that some doors must close so others can open. Here's the truth I want you to carry. Sometimes betrayal doesn't break us. Sometimes it becomes the fire that forges us stronger. Their neglect taught me to stand on my own. Their attempt to claim my work taught me to defend it. Their silence pushed me into the arms of those who truly valued me, and in that space I discovered something more powerful than recognition. I discovered peace. So if you've ever felt invisible, dismissed, or betrayed by the very people who should have loved you most, let my story be a reminder. Your worth isn't measured by who applauds you. It's measured by the courage you show when no one claps at all. Maybe your family never understood you. Maybe they never will. But that doesn't make your dreams smaller or your value less. It only means your audience, the people meant to see you, may be waiting elsewhere. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to like and subscribe. Not for me, but so others who carry the same quiet wounds might hear this and know, They are not alone. Because in the end, the most important approval you'll ever receive is the one you give yourself.